Alright boys, in today's video we're going to be doing the Gold Assassin Servant tier list video. Hopefully I don't drop this video and then we get a really strong, Gold Assassin release, because literally as soon as I drop the Gold Rider tier list, that is when we got like two very strong Gold Riders over on the JP version of the game, and I was like, dude, I literally just dropped this video. So hopefully we're not going to get some random OP Gold Assassin released in like the next 2 days on the JP version of the game. Hopefully none of that happens, no nonsense. But this was actually a tier list that I was surprised about, because I thought a lot of the assassins were either going to be in like a high A tier or even just S tier, or they were going to be like D tier and low C tier. Like, I didn't really think there was going to be any middle ground for a lot of these assassins. But when you go back and look at a lot of the gold assassins, even people like, Steno, Yu, Yanqing, Wu Zeddian, people that you kind of looked at those assassins when they first came out, and a lot of people were like, oh, these are completely mid or just even unrunnable servants in cases like Steno. But they've gotten so many buffs, and a lot of them go under the radar because they're not insanely broken. It's not like someone like Ozymandias, who gets two insanely powerful buffs that make him an absolute juggernaut in the game. The buffs that they've been getting are just little things here and there that kind of just help them function a bit better. So a lot of these assassins are actually looking a lot better than you might think they are. So as we go through some of these gold assassins, and I'm just like mentioning things that they've gotten, it might surprise you how actually good a lot of these servants are. However, before we begin, this video is again sponsored by Baiyi, which if you sign up for Baiyi in the description down below using my link, you actually get 2,000 yen just put into your account for signing up using my link, and then you can use that to buy a lot of just very popular like Japanese products, right? Like, have you ever wanted this absolutely adorable Saber Altar figure? Or have you ever wanted this incredibly based Skahawk figure? Well, congratulations, buddy. Like, if you sign up in the description down below, not only can you buy a lot of these Japanese products through Baiyi, but you also get 2,000 yen to spend on all of these products. And as you can see, like, some of these, if you get the 2k yen, you're already like halfway to getting this Mask figure, or like you're about like a fifth of the way to getting this Artoria figure. Like, and these are some pretty nice figures that you can buy. Might have to cop some myself, or I don't know, maybe you want to cosplay and you want to get, your Ritsuka outfit, right? Maybe you want to get that. But yeah, they're sponsoring today's video. If you sign up using my link down in the description down below, you'll get 2,000 yen in your account, and then you'll be able to use that to like buy some of these products, right? So thanks again, Baiyi, for sponsoring this video. Get that 2k yen and get yourself some nice Japanese products. However, on that note, we can go ahead and start with the video, starting off with Steno, who I actually have graded at C-. If you guys don't know how this works, is that, since we're doing a Fate tier list, I've started to grade a lot of these servants, and I'm doing it in the fashion of the actual ranking system in the Fate verse, right? Where you have anywhere from A, B, C. I don't really go below, D, but, D is the kind of like bottom. And then instead of EX, we just have S. I should probably change it to EX, because I think that just makes sense for Fate. But basically, the plus and minus system in Fate essentially says that, like, if you're C-, you could technically go lower than C, but I'm ranking them still as C. But if they have a plus, like let's say they're B+, they could be A tier, but they're still comfortably going to be sitting in the higher end of B. So Steno being a C- does mean that I do think you can say she's definitely a C tier servant, but she's either very low or you could bump her down to D tier. Now, the thing is that, like, Steno does have good things going for her, unironically. She does have a chance to reduce an enemy's NP gauge. She has a double buff for divine allies, meaning if you bring her with someone that has divinity, she will give them a 40% attack buff. She has a 100% chance to charm a male enemy. She has that both on her NP and one of her skills. It does mean that it's a little restrictive to her fighting males, but I mean, you can do like charm locks with her. I guess that does have some use. Her NP itself she does have a 27% battery to help her get to that NP, but the NP's a little hit or miss because aside from the charm and her lowering their defense by 20 to 30% depending on NP level, and let's be honest, a lot of people probably do have higher NP copies of Steno because, you know, she likes to spook a lot of people, so that's pretty decent. But then she has this like weird chance to insta-kill them. Like, I don't know why they gave her that. Honestly, I think the most useful thing on her NP is that she just removes all of their buffs, and that's why I couldn't quite just put her in D tier flat out like a D plus servant. That's why I put her at C minus, because she does have good things. The fact that she does have a battery, the fact that she can just remove all of an enemy's debuffs, or not debuffs, but buffs, and then double buff divine allies, which divine allies are very, very strong. You know, most servants with divinity are pretty good, or at least just average to very strong. So I do think she's worth being C minus. Again, a little surprising because, you know, I thought she was going to be Dookie Dog tier, but she, you know, I think she could comfortably sit in C, followed by Carmilla. I think Carmilla is a very strong C tier. You could maybe make the argument for like C plus. The problem is that like she has a very good NP that lets her just nuke and like just like any female enemy, right? Like she just does big boy damage against them because not only does she get a damage mod, but she also gets a 20% attack buff for 3 turns. So, you know, that also means on a subsequent NP, if you can get it within those 3 turns, you're actually hitting them with a 40% attack buff plus the special damage mod. And then like her skills themselves aren't all that bad. I mean, she has the same like 80% chance that Steno does to reduce an enemy's NP gauge. She can reduce one enemy's defense by 20% for 3 turns, but since she's single target, I mean, that's fine. It doesn't need to be an AoE defense down because she's only going to be hitting one person anyway. She has the same 27% battery, and she gets 10 stars per turn for 3 turns. On top of her also being an assassin with like just decent natural star genning abilities, it does make her good. I just have her at C because it just seems like she's a very limited one-trick pony, right? She's almost like, I would say, a worse version of someone like Skahawk, right? Because I look at Skahawk and I call her a one-trick pony, but she does have a lot of things she can kind of do. She's kind of getting out of that niche because Skahawk has like the targetable quick mana burst, she has star weight, crit damage, you know, she has a big nuke in her NP. It's just like Carmilla needs something else to kind of help her out a little bit. I think she could easily skyrocket up into like B plus tier if they just gave her like crit damage or something to kind of just round out her kit. Maybe a small buster buff, like a 30% buster buff for 3 turns, just so her buster cards could also do a little bit more damage following up her NP. She's just kind of missing a few pieces here or there, but I don't think she's atrocious. And again, I think you can make the argument that she should be rated as C+, but I have her at C for now. Then we have Jack. Now, Jack is pretty much the embodiment of what I would call like a B tier servant. Because as a year 1 servant, you're kind of fighting an uphill battle, right? Like, I know I'm already going to get comments of people being like, bro, how is Jack not S tier? It's like, okay, bro, you're thinking about year 1, where like a lot of these servants that had like not super crazy skills or everything were like the best in the game, but now in the current meta, she's definitely just an average, solid servant, but she's nothing exceptional. Because if we look at the things that she does, she has a dodge, which is fine. I mean, that keeps her alive in challenge quests. She has a quick mana burst, which is good. It gives her NP damage, and it helps her follow-up quick cards after an NP. Just annoying that it's on the same skill as her survivability, because then it means you have to choose between getting her quick mana burst, which is not only important for doing damage, but it also buffs the NP gain of her quick card, so it's important for both of those, or you have to choose between, you know, using the dodge to survive for a turn. So that's a little annoying, but you can kind of get around it if you're using supports. You know, if you're bringing people like Scotty does, you know, I know it's a meme, but she does have the dodge on her NP, so you can kind of subvert that a little bit and keep her alive. She does have the ability to remove one enemy's buffs, which is very strong, because it means that Jack really doesn't need something like Pierce Invincibility or Sure Hit, because you can just remove those buffs and pierce the enemy anyway. But even if they do start stacking defense, her NP pierces defense innately. But one of the things that I find very odd, and one of the things that I think is just super strange with Jack, is that her special anti-female damage mod is only 50 to 100%, when usually the special damage mod is 150 to 200%. Like, that's the norm. And for whatever reason, Jack got incredibly shafted with 50 to 100%. Like, I don't know why they did that, and I don't know why they didn't fix it when they buffed her NP. Like, I really don't understand what they were doing with, like, Jack and why they just left it like that. You know, it's just very, very strange, and it just kind of leaves her, I don't want to say lackluster, because Jack can still perform very well. Like, you can still get away with using this servant, and she's not like absolutely atrocious or anything, right? And that's why she's pretty much a B tier servant. She has good things going for her, but then you have just like oddities, like they gotta buff her third skill. Like they gotta go ahead and just like rank that up and just make it something else. Like, I don't know, like it's a targetable heal that gives like NP gain to somebody, just something along those lines, or an attack buff, just something along those lines. She has a very solid foundation, and they need to start capitalizing on that, because you look at Jack, who's a year 1 single target quick assassin, and you look at MHX, who has had literally everything on her buffed, and I have her written down as an A tier servant. I think you can make the argument that she's an A plus servant, possibly even slide her up into S tier with how good this servant is after all of her buffs. Because, I mean, she just does so much now. Like, she reduces all enemies' defense by 20%. Her fire support skill is a delayed 80% chance to stun the entire enemy party. She has an invincibility to keep her alive in harder content. She can drop 20 stars immediately for immediate use for critting, on top of her being an assassin that can also gen stars very well, but it's just very good to start her off on turn 1 when you immediately get in the battle and can drop stars. Then she has her damage mod against sabers, which, like Jack, is 50%, so it's kind of like a nice thing that she can do. But she also gets a 100% star gen buff against sabers for 3 turns. She gets, you know, a 20% attack buff for 3 turns as well to help buff up her damage. And then her NP on top of all of that nukes sabers and has an insane 12 hits on it. So it's like, it's just absolutely crazy. So unlike someone like Jack, who got completely shafted with a 50% damage mod, at least MHX has one on a skill and then has it on her NP as well. So she just works very well as a single target assassin. And if you want to bring her to fight sabers, I know the meme is like, oh man, I can't believe this assassin, like you got to bring her to fight sabers, but she does so much damage against them that you really just don't care, right? She just is very phenomenal. It did require her to get all of her skills and her NP buffed, but she's an exceptional, very, very strong servant now. And even then, you kind of want servants to have as many buffs as possible, because that's more Saint Quartz for you. You know, that's more, you know, Saint Quartz from, you know, doing the actual quest and from the missions. You know, the master missions that give you like 10 Saint Quartz for every 10 interludes and rank ups you do. So you do want that. So like, not only is she valuable for like being good now, but it's actually like, hey, if you want some Saint Quartz, you know, you summon for her, you get a couple of them back. So yeah, definitely, I want to see Jack get something like MHX, because I want her to be good, because she was very, very strong in the first year, and she could definitely turn that around. Now, next we have Emia, or Carry, whatever you would like to call him. I have him at C+, because he has like decent stuff going for him, but he's going to need a little bit more to kind of turn it around, if you know what I mean. Because for one, he has like a 40% one-turn arts mana burst, and mana bursts are usually 50% for 1 turn instead of 40% for 1 turn. So that's already a little odd. That probably needs to be brought up to either 40% for 3 turns, 40% for 3 hits, or 50% for 1 turn, or 50% for 3 hits. That needs to get buffed in some capacity to help him out. He does have little things like a 3-turn pierce invincibility, 50% crit damage for 3 turns. His scapegoat skill allows him to taunt an ally and drop 15 stars. And that scapegoat skill is very nice for utility, because it allows certain team builds where you want someone like, say, Amadeus to come in, drop his buffs, and then you want him out of there as soon as possible. If you're running Carry, it allows you to put a taunt on him and just let Amadeus get exploded by the enemy, so you can shuffle somebody out without having to waste your plug suit. So it makes situations like that very nice. It's very unique that he has that, and it's kind of rarer to have a taunt that is targetable. I believe there's only like 2 or 3 servants in the game that have that ability. And then even then, like one of the other ones, like Odysseus, it's not targetable. It's just on everybody except himself. So it's a very, very good skill that he does have. And then his NP pierces defense. So between his skills and his NP, you're piercing invincibility and defense, which means he's a servant that's very valuable because he can get through anything. And then he's an art servant that reduces an enemy's NP gauge by 1 every time he fires his NP. So it's like, as long as you can keep looping his NP, you can essentially suppress the enemy's NP and not allow them to just blast you with their NP. So that's why I have him at C+, because I think you can make the argument that he's a low B tier, because he has good things going for him. The Pierce Invincibility, Pierce Defense combo is insanely good. The fact that he has crit damage, and the fact that he at least has an arts buff, I know it's not the best, and it's only one turn, but he does at least have it to help him out with his damage and his NP gain. I think those are all very good things. And the scapegoat thing, while it is kind of restrictive, it's kind of like a summer BB thing where depending on how 5-head you're going to be, you're going to get more value out of it, but it is something that he does have in the back pocket. So he's going to be sitting at C+. Then we have Shuten Doji. I think she's a very strong B+ servant. The main thing that really holds Shuten Doji back is the fact that her NP only has one hit on it, and so you can't really effectively loop a lot of her NP back from firing her own NP. And even if we're just not going to be using her for farming, it's just good for challenge quests to be able to loop back a decent bit of NP so you can keep firing your NP, especially when you're Shuten Doji and you have this like insane debuff dump on the entire enemy party with like some of the notable things that our NP does, like it lowers the enemy party's NP damage, their attack, their defense, seals their skills. It has very good things that you want to kind of keep stacking on the enemy, and it's just kind of a problem that you can't keep them suppressed like that because she only has one hit on her NP. But her skills are still very, very good. She not only has a 60% chance to charm the entire enemy party, but she also guaranteed lowers their defense by 20% as well. So even if you don't get the charms, you could still smack them because they're getting their defense lowered by 20%. She has the very strong Oni Charisma, where she gives the entire party a 20% attack buff for 3 turns, but then buffs her own NP damage by 30% for 3 turns. So she is double buffing herself essentially, and getting like basically more than a mana burst, because I know you see the 20 and the 30%, you know, like those add into each other, but no, an attack buff multiplies into an NP damage buff, so she's getting mad damage. That's why she's one of the harder hitting servants in the game. Like, she does big boy damage, at least for an AoE. And then she also has a very large 4k guts, which means she revives with 4k HP when her guts procs, which is very high. And then she also has a 30% battery that she was recently given. So I can't rightfully put her in A. I want to see like maybe one more buff for Shuten Doji before she can comfortably sit in A, but I'm fine giving her B+, because I do think if you want to make the argument, I think you could probably argue it, but she's definitely a high B tier servant. Then we have Cleopatra, which this is a servant I actually have at A-, because while I do think she's very, very strong when it comes to challenge quests, she's kind of reliant on getting that Imperial Privilege off. Because if you don't know, Imperial Privilege is a 40% attack and defense buff to yourself for 3 turns. It's insanely strong because it makes you very tanky and it makes you hit very, very hard. But you only have a 60% chance for both of those individually to proc. And unless you have people like Ozymandias around, you know, it's just going to be kind of annoying. And so when you look at servants that have kind of these chance-based buffed, you really want them to have their own way to guarantee their own buff success rate. That's what makes them like absolute killers. It's what makes someone like Ozymandias insanely good, the fact that he can guarantee his own Imperial Privilege. And Cleopatra just doesn't have that yet. She does have other very strong tools like 40% NP gain for 3 turns, refunding 10% NP for 3 turns, the fact that she has an invincibility, she can remove her own debuffs, and she has the MHX thing where she can drop 28 stars for immediate use. All of that is very, very strong. It's just, one of the things that I think she really needs to be like an A+ or even S tier contender is some way to guarantee that Imperial Privilege, plus maybe one other minor buff here or there. I mean, her NP is already very strong as is, as it slaps the entire enemy party with buff block for 1 instance, and it gives her a 1-turn 30 to 70% buster buff, which means not only is her NP going to be doing more damage, but it means her follow-up buster cards are also going to be doing more damage. It's kind of a shame, because I kind of just wish Cleopatra was either an AoE quick or AoE art servant, but I did a video recently on her, so if you want more thoughts on that, you know, that's why Cleopatra's there, but she's going to be an A-. Then we have our first S-tier servant. Like, I don't really think I need to say much about Hassan. Everybody knows how good Hassan is. Like, he is one of the best solo servants in the entire game, because his skills are all like, well, I mean, before he got his buff, they were all just generic good skills, like big guts, big attack, big defense, all that stuff. But then they gave him a buff, right? So on top of having a big 5k guts, they gave him a 30% buster buff that if your guts gets procced. You get 20% NP and then a 50% buster buff for 1 turn as well. So not only did they help him out by making his damage more consistent, because one of the only real problems with Hassan before he got his buff is that his only buster buff was on his 3rd skill that lowered the entire enemy's insta-kill resistance by 100% for 3 turns, and then gave him basically a buster mana burst. And so it was like, when he didn't have that skill up, you know, his damage, or like his NP, or, you know, his buster face cards wouldn't do as much damage, but this helps him be a little more consistent. And then you just look at all the other stuff he's doing, he's just crazy. Like, he has 100% debuff resistance, 40% defense, and then 20% attack for 3 turns just for free. And then you got to remember that that attack buff multiplies into the buster buff that he has more often now, so he's going to be looking very strong now. And his passives are kind of insane. Like, for one, if you're fighting trash bronze enemies and maybe sometimes getting lucky with a silver enemy, he has a passive 5% chance to insta-kill enemies with all of his attacks, which means when he's soloing and he's fighting a lot of trash mobs, you will see instances where he'll like poke somebody with the quick card and they'll just drop like that. Like, they'll just disappear from the battlefield. Like, they just get obliterated. And it's very nice when that happens, especially when it's like, oh man, that bronze enemy had like 100k HP and Hassan is just like, nope, they're just dead. Like, he just obliterates them. And then something nice for him, because he's a solo servant, is that he cannot be charmed or insta-killed because that's in his passive. So it's very nice for challenge quests when some of the bosses, like you guys might remember from year 1, you had like the Skahawk challenge quest where she had a very high chance to insta-kill people, even with just like by tapping them or something, right? So having that immunity is very good because the insta-kill procced through things like invincibility. And so just not being able to have that happen is very nice for that very difficult content. We're going to be using him anyway. And then, you know, not being able to be charmed is very, very nice when it comes to challenge quests as well, because a lot of enemies will have like these passive charm things. Even the tower event right now, there's like a Medea Lily and Demon Pillar node where they have like a passive chance to charm you every turn. And like, even though that's not necessarily super hard in the Amazonas event right now, even though it's not really hard, it's very annoying. And the fact that he just can't be charmed, which is basically just a different stun buff, is absolutely insane. Really, the only thing I like to see them do is buff his NP, because all it does right now is it just is a big stick with insta-kill. But even though his NP is kind of just a big meat stick, he's still absolutely insane with all of his skills. And I understand why they didn't go crazy with his NP, but honestly, if they wanted to, they could have his NP just do what they've kind of been doing. Just give it like a 20% buster buff that procs first for 3 turns. So that means when he has his first skill up, that means he'll always basically have a mana burst up after he fires his NP. And I think that would make him absolutely even more insane. So after we're done, you know, just praising Hassan over here, Yanqing is going to be going in B-. Now, Yanqing is actually a servant that I'm surprised with how good this guy actually is, because when I thought about Yanqing, I was like, oh, this guy's not very good, because I've never like really used him or had a need to bust him out. But after checking him out, this guy's actually gotten pretty strong. So he's packing 1 turn of star weight and 40% NP gain, which is very good to help him refund his NP and do like a very strong quick chain that can like refund his NP and help him do very, very strong damage with his crits, because then his second skill is giving him a 30% quick buff, a star gen buff, and a crit damage buff for 3 turns, right? And those are all 30% values. And so it makes the turn that he fires off his NP just very strong with that chain. But as an assassin, you guys know that he's very good at genning stars. So something he can actually do to help out his allies is he can kill his own star weight with his 3rd skill, drop 20 stars, and give that to the other people and hopefully like help them out and let them have the stars. Now, that's only, you only need to like worry about that if, you know, you're like only have 25 stars or something and you're like, man, I really need Jalter to get these stars. It's very nice for that. But in all reality, he should just be dropping like 50 stars for everybody to play around with, right? So absolutely good when it comes to his skills. And then his NP pops a whacking 11 hits, lowers the enemy's quick resistance by 30% for 3 turns. Sorry, I just had a minor stroke there, but unfortunately it doesn't proc first. I kind of wish it did to make his NP hit a little bit harder, but it is still nice on subsequent NPs. As I was talking about earlier, it is quite easy for him to get his NP back. and he does actually get a 50% crit damage buff for 3 turns as well. So that stacking with his second skill does mean those subsequent quick crit cards, like if I'm assuming that's the chain you're going to be doing, are going to have 80% bare minimum and potentially like 280% if you're using it with double Scotty. So Yanqing being a B- servant, I think is actually very fun. Like, this servant, if they just maybe, I don't know, just made his first skill 3 turns, I think it'd be absolutely insane. Wu Zeddian is basically like kind of the same thing. Surprised with kind of how good this servant is, despite her being a bit simpler, you know what I'm saying? Because she can reduce one enemy's defense by 30% for 3 turns, which is very strong. Lowering by 30% is a bit higher than the normal 20%, so that is notable. And then she also hits them with an instance of buff block, which is very strong for boss fights, because you can basically just tell a boss, no, you're going to use this broken skill that's going to like kind of ruin my whole setup. You're not going to be able to do that. And the fact that it's targetable is absolutely insane. Then she has a slightly weaker Imperial Privilege at 38%. Not super notable with how much weaker it is, but I do think it is worth noting that, like, they did slightly shaft her there, but it's really not going to matter. Again, like someone like Cleopatra doesn't really have a way to guarantee her Imperial Privilege, but it is a very strong skill to have, because when you get it, it's very strong. Then she has a very famous charisma that people know, because she's like, aside from Scotty and Van Gogh, she's one of the few people that actually can buff the entire party's quick performance, because she gives everybody a 20% attack buff and a 20% quick buff for 3 turns. And then her NP removes the enemy party's buffs, which is absolutely insane. Doesn't proc first, but it makes it very good as a like first NP in a chain, because if they all like set up invincibilities or high defense skills or something along those lines, you can just pop hers first. Even though it's not going to do much damage, you just yeet all their buffs, and then the next NP is not only going to be getting a stage of overcharge, but then they're also going to be able to get a clean attack in. And then she also gives herself a 50% crit buff for 3 turns. So, you know, her being just an assassin and being able to gen stars pretty easily naturally does mean she can kind of take advantage of those if you're using her as like a pseudo DPS. So I think B- is absolutely fine for her. Summer Needle I have at B, although this one is one of those ones that I might actually lower to like B- or even just drop her to C+. This is one that I'm actually not as sure about. Like, this is one that I'm a little contestable on, because she has good things like the Tamamo defensive skill, which basically means she has 60% defense on turn 1, and then turns 2 and 3 when the skill is up, give her 30% defense, so she's kind of tanky. She has a taunt that also gives her DR for 3 attacks. If you don't know what DR is, it's just damage reduction. So in conjunction with her first skill, she basically will take no damage, especially if it's on turn 1, because she'll have 60% defense and damage cut. So you can basically use her as a damage sponge, which is useful. But then it's just like, she has a very strong, like, just core of skills, because then she also has 30% attack, 20% NP damage, which is a very strong combo that's allowing her to do some decent damage. And then 30% NP gain is also very strong, all for 3 turns. And it's just very hard to drop her below B tier, because those are all very, very strong. And then her NP drops the enemy's defense by 20% for 3 turns, but doesn't proc first. I know I have her rated at B tier, but I actually might slap her down to C+ in the middle of the video, because this is one of those ones that I've been kind of going back and forth on ever since like I started making this tier list. So I'm actually going to drop her down there just mid-video. Look, you guys gotta know that my opinions on some of these servants, I'm like, I don't know, like I'm gonna bump her down. But yeah, C+ something I'm pretty confident in, even though like she has some utility. She's kind of missing things that like make me confidently put her up here with like someone like Yanqing, who, even though I have him at B-, I might bump him to like B+. Like, I think he's significantly better with his buff. So I find it kind of hard for her to stand up with a lot of these people. Then we have a Chiomate. Chiomate is kind of just like standard .jpeg art servant. Like, I have her at C+ because she's not anything super insane. She's just kind of like good, you know, like she's just solid. She can seal one enemy's NP. She has 30% arts buff for 3 turns, just standard good. She has an evasion to keep herself alive, a 30% battery. That's good, because within a pen skill, that's a fake 50% battery. And her NP seals an enemy skill, right? And then she just does like decent damage. So it's just like, she just kind of standard .jpeg good art servant. Have her at C+. Nothing super notable going on there, right? I think she's just absolutely fine. Donzo I also have at C+. But for a different reason. I think Donzo is actually a very interesting servant to use, because she's like this interesting defensive support that you can bring, because she has two skills that basically do the same thing. One of them gives your ally a dodge and a 45% star gen buff for one turn, and the other one gives them a targetable invincibility with that same star gen buff. So she has two ways to protect her allies with a targetable dodge and invincibility. Her NP buffs the party's buster damage by 20% for 3 turns, nukes demonic enemies, and then keep in mind, her first skill gives her a 30% quicken buster buff, so when she actually has the first skill up and she fires her NP, she has a buster mana burst for 3 turns, which is actually insane. Unfortunately, she doesn't really do a whole lot of damage unless she's fighting demonic enemies, but it's like, she has an interesting kit going. Like, she's not bad. The fact that she can give herself a buster mana burst means that her damage can be acceptable. She given herself that quick buff does mean that she's going to buff up the NP gain of her quick cards and be just a slightly better star gen as well. You can give the buffs to herself or make your party a bit more safe by giving them a targetable dodge and invincibility. It's just, she's kind of missing like maybe 1 or 2 more pieces. Like, honestly, if we just took her first skill and made it party-wide, I think she would be absolutely dummy broken. So I just kind of want to see one more support type thing for the party, like a charisma, just something little here, just one more little thing. I mean, a charisma actually would be really strong as well. Like, she just gave herself the 30% quicken buster, but then a 20% charisma to the party. That would actually help her damage out a lot, because then it would be multiplying into the buster buff for her NP, and that should be very, very strong. That, or I'd like to see like maybe a crit damage buff to the entire party, something along those lines. Osaka Behime, I really don't need to talk about Osaka Behime, just did a video on her. Basically, all you gotta know is that she's a very strong support type servant, or she can be an insanely good solo type servant. So I just made a video on her recently. Yeah, I just sung her praises. She's absolutely insane. Someone else I don't think I need to talk about either is Koyanskaya. Let me just go and put her up there as well. Like, if you think I need to justify Koyanskaya being up here in S, you're smoking crack. Like, I don't need to justify this. In fact, we could probably make a higher tier just for Koyanskaya, because she's ridiculous. Like, she allows such insane nonsense in this game. But back down to earth to the normal servants, we have Semiramis, who I have at just B, not B+. I think Semiramis is a very, like, just decently strong servant, right? She has a 30% battery, so that means that with her append skill, she actually can have a fake 50% battery, which is very important because it makes her usable in the Koyanskaya Buster meta. I think that's very strong. She has the ability to lower all enemies' debuff resistance, which is very important because her third skill lowers all enemies' Buster resistance down by 50% for 3 turns. As you just gotta have 8 stars to be able to use it, but it's a very nice combo of, like, trying something new. Like, so instead of giving herself a buster buff for 3 turns, she lowers the entire enemy parties by 50% for 3 turns. And so that's actually pretty interesting, because it's not only improving her own damage, but it's also improving the party's damage as well. Because if you have anybody else around that's also going to be using their buster cards or buster NPs, they'll also get some pretty good damage. And then, you know, she has 40% NP gain for 3 turns, and she has a very interesting buff against casters to kind of nullify her weakness as an assassin. So I don't think any of this is particularly crazy, but it is just very solid. Like, you can't deny that she's a very just by the books, very standard .jpg good, just in general, Buster AoE servant, not just Buster AoE assassin, just a good Buster AoE servant in general. Kind of just, I don't want to say formulaic, but she is just generic good stuff, the servant. Now, moving on, we have Summer Ushi, who I originally was going to have in C tier, but I actually bumped her up to B tier recently because I think she actually has just enough going on for her that I think she's absolutely fine. One of the things that kind of saves her is the fact that she does have a 40% battery. That 40% battery is absolutely insane, very, very clutch, and especially with the rise of append skills, it kind of makes it from like, oh man, she's just shy of a 50% battery to being like, well, all you got to do is kind of like almost complete her append skill, like just get her append skill to 5, and I have a 50% battery. So that's absolutely insane for her. She has an evasion to make herself good in more difficult content. A 30% quick buff for 3 turns is very solid for helping her stay consistent. And then, unfortunately, the one thing I don't like is that her third skill only gives her 1 turn of star weight. The 1 turn of star weight is good, I just wish it was for 3 turns to help her, you know, kind of secure the crits for herself. The 1 turn of debuff immunity is fine because they don't really give out 3 turns all that often. I'm just happy it's 1 turn of debuff immunity and not, you know, just for 1 hit. And then she also has this interesting ability that I also thought kind of helps her stay up here, and that she has this on attack buff that whenever she attacks an enemy with her 3rd skill being up, she can actually have a 40% chance to remove their buffs whenever she attacks. So you can actually put this in front of like her NP and try to like remove an enemy's invincibility or their dodge or something to actually let her just smack them with her NP. The only thing that I think she's really missing is a crit damage buff. She doesn't really have a crit damage buff. I mean, the other thing that I think is a little odd is that her NP removes the enemy's offensive buffs and lowers their quick resistance by 20% for 3 turns, but it doesn't proc first, which I think is a little weird. But I think the most important thing for her to get is some crit damage. I think if she's able to get just a generic 50% crit buff for 3 turns, I honestly think she just becomes like a B+ servant. You know, I think that just helps her out a lot, because she can gen a lot of stars, and, you know, she can get the crits for herself, but she doesn't have any way to really make those quick crits bite, which is probably a byproduct of her being around during the Scotty meta, which I've talked about how you'll notice a lot of Buster servants around the time when Merlin came out didn't get like their own survivability buff, or they would be missing a crit damage buff, and that's because DW is like, oh, we don't need to give them these buffs because you'll just use them with Merlin, and Merlin will give you those buffs. And the same thing could be said with Scotty. They're like, we don't need to give her a crit damage buff because she'll get that from Scotty. But unfortunately, when you look at the servant in a vacuum, or you want to pair them with other servants or other supports, or you want to do more interesting things, you'd rather the servants also have the ability to do it themselves as well. It's just better to have like kind of a win more situation where she not only has 50% crit damage, but then Scotty can give her another 100% for her quick cards than her just not having it at all, right? It would just makes her design be a little bit better. Now, this is probably where people are going to be very surprised, because you is kind of like, people are probably expecting you to be in D tier, like in Dookie Dogwater Town. I would say you're a fool that doesn't read what the servants actually do. So you, I actually have at B+, because she's a very, very, very strong servant now, especially after her buff. She gives herself 10% NP every turn for 5 turns, so it's essentially 50% NP over 5 turns. Very strong with longevity. She also gets a turn of debuff immunity to make sure the enemy cannot debuff her. She does get 1000 HP every turn for 5 turns. I usually don't note that because it's so low, but the 1k over 5 turn period does mean you'll get a total of 5k HP. So as long as you can like keep the enemy off of her, you actually can get her some pretty decent regen going. But then this is the crazy part. So people know that her NP removes her debuffs and her own buffs. It basically just cleanses everything off of her, right? But her second skill got buffed to give her 100% buff removal resistance for 3 turns, on top of also getting a 30% attack buff that also lasts for 3 turns, which actually makes her kind of crazy, because now you can resist her removing her own buffs, and now she's actually kind of chatty, because you can have that 30% attack buff multiplying into her overcharge, which her overcharge is a 50% to 100% buster buff that procs first on NP. It's absolutely insane, because then you have the 30% attack buff multiplying into the buster buff, and it makes her very, very strong. On top of that, she has an 80% drain. She has a 27% battery. Yu is just very, very strong after getting her ability to not destroy all of her buffs. The only thing is that if you're going to be playing with Yu, you just have to know you can't fire the NP unless skill 2 is up. But the problem with Yu is that originally her second skill only lasted for 1 turn. So it was like, once you fired your 1 major NP, Yu was kind of just a wet paper towel because she couldn't, stop herself from removing her buffs. But now it lasts for 3 turns, so you can more comfortably use her NP a bit more often and kind of just get the big boy damage that you would like to see. And it just makes her a bit better. I can understand people just not even wanting to bother with Yu, but she is very, very strong if you do decide to use her. Speaking of a very strong servant, you also have Schwinn, who I'm actually going to be bumping to A- at the end over here, the video, right? Because I had him at B+ originally, but I'm actually going to bump him to A- because I think the things that Lee does, even though he's a burst servant, you guys know that at this point in the meta, burst servants aren't necessarily the best. You would rather a servant be consistently good for 3 turns. Like, instead of having a servant that can do 200k damage and then 50k, 50k, you'd rather have a servant that just does like 125, 125, 125, right? You'd rather just have that consistent damage to like just give you more damage overall over the course of the 3 turns, and just have them be more consistent and not have to worry about them losing buffs. Because even though like doing like, let's say like the 200k, then the 50k and the 50k, that does mean you'll have like 300k, right, total damage, and the person that's doing consistent 125, right, it does mean they'll have 375k. Even if you're like, well, that's not like the biggest difference in damage, you also have to factor in things like having your skills up consistently, like things like your defensive buffs and stuff like that. Like, you can just be solid for 3 turns. You know, the 1 turn guy losing a lot of that stuff can mean that they might get snapped up by one of the bosses or something. But Schwinn, I think, does the job very well, and I do think it would be disingenuous to not acknowledge how good of a burst damage servant he is, because he can actually look solid on that 2nd turn. Because if you're using Schwinn, you basically just like slap all of his buffs, you know, you just obliterate whoever you're fighting, and then as long as you have like a good chain, like you have like an arch chain or something, you should refund his NP, and even though his buffs are gone, you should still be able to do some pretty solid damage. Because the one thing Lee gets that a lot of the other burst servants don't get is that like his Pierce Invincibility has 100% crit damage, the star weight, the evasion, the 15 stars, and the debuff immunity. Those are all 1 turn. But he does have a 50% attack buff. That lasts for 1 turn, but it doesn't go away. It just turns into a 20% attack buff for the next 2 turns. And so that does mean that his damage doesn't completely die off. It does mean he can still kind of keep some consistent damage, and his NP does reduce the enemy's defense by 20% for 3 turns, and it procs first. So unlike a lot of these other burst servants that completely fall off after they pop all their skills, Lee can still remain somewhat competitive because he still at least has some of his attack buff left, and he's still stacking his defense down on the enemy that does proc first, so he doesn't completely die off. And once I kind of thought about that, I was like, no, he's better than I'm not giving him enough credit, because he's not like a lot of these other burst servants that just die off. He does remain somewhat consistent. Now, bro, do I need to justify Kama? Do I need to justify Kama being an S tier? Probably not. Again, if you think that Kama or Koyenskaya or Hassan, even for that factor, or Osaka Behime need a justification for S tier, you're smoking crack, okay? And I'd advise you to save your money and stop buying crack. And buy some St. Quartz instead, bro. Like, I don't know. But yeah, Kama really doesn't need a justification. She like overcharges her own NP, which gives her, you know, bonus quick performance. She has a 50% battery, strong 30% attack buff, guts, anti-alter ego, lowers enemy charm resistance, and smacks them with like an 80% charm chance on her NP. The only weird thing is that she has 20% crit damage, but then again, she I don't know, like that's the only like weak part that she really has. Again, probably just a byproduct of her being in the Scotty meta. The other thing that I would mention is that you might think that like the only way for her to get her quick buffs is to overcharge her NP. She technically starts at overcharge 2 because of her first skill, so she starts off at 25%, but she does also have a passive 10% quick buff, so technically she starts off at 35%. So, and then that lasts for 3 turns, so that stacks into the next NP, and it's very easy to loop her NP. So again, not really needing any justification for her. Now, unfortunately, we kind of have to end this on poo-poo stinky. I don't know what they did to my girl over here. Just Okita Jet, C-. I just don't know why they built her the way they did, because she has good things. Like, she has 100% crit damage, good star weight. But then they're like, you remove your latest defensive buff. Okay, that's fine. I can play around that. Just don't activate it when your dodge is up, or just activate this first and then activate your dodge skill. Just something along those lines, right? It's on a good 4-turn cooldown. You know, she has an evasion. She has pierce evasion. That's good stuff. 20% NP damage. That's very strong as well. Going into her 50% quick buff, that's 3 turns. You know, 50% quick mana burst for 3 turns. That's insanely strong. But then she lowers her defense every turn for 3 turns, and it's like, wouldn't be the biggest deal, but she gets down to like basically nuking her defense into the ground to where like a light breeze is going to obliterate her. And you're like, dude, what are y'all doing? But like the cherry on top, like I could forgive all of this, right? Because then at the very least, she could be like a looping servant or something. Is that who cares what her NP does? Like, I like that it removes enemy defensive buffs, right? It doesn't proc first, but it's still a very good skill to have. She reduces the enemy's defense by 30% for 3 turns. That's all good. But she has a 60% chance to stun herself, and she has a no innate debuff immunity. They didn't give her that. And I'm like, bro, what are y'all doing? Like, I don't know what they were thinking making this servant. Like, I don't know if they were just like, haha, this will be funny lore memes or something, but the 60% chance to stun herself on her NP, and dude, even when you came out, like, you had the annoying ability to remove all of her buffs, but they at least gave you one instance of 100% buff removal resistance for 1 turn. They at least gave you that so you could at least use her once. Okita, you might pop her NP for the first time, she stuns herself, and you've just completely wasted a turn. Like, if you're thinking in terms of, like, an effective 3-turn setup, 2 turns, or, you know, or 1-turn burst turn servant, like, you know, like we were talking about with Schwinn, it's like, Okita can be like, okay, she does 80,000 damage turn 1, 0 damage, and then 80,000 on turn 3. And it's just like, bro, you just lose out that turn completely. And then, like, if you guys remember how we were talking, I was like, okay, so that servant was a 300k as a just 1 pump jump, and the 3-turn consistent guy is like 375k. Okita's over here at like 160 because she completely lost a turn. It's just like, they didn't even make it a coin flip, right? I feel like it's some spite thing that they were like, it's 60%. It's slightly higher than a coin flip. Like, it's slightly more likely to happen. And I'm just like, I don't know what they were thinking with her, but yeah, it's very unfortunate. Please just give her some buff that gives her like 3 turns of debuff immunity. Just give her something. Like, sure, funny meme, haha, we're all laughing, but can you fix the servant now? Like, can you fix her, please? Like I'm saying, everything else would be passable. You can get around it. It's annoying, but you can get around it. Just give her the debuff immunity so she doesn't actually shoot herself in the foot with her NP. But with that being said, guys, that is going to be the Gold Assassin tier list video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to check out Baiyi, link down in the description down below. And with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late, guys.